Well, two political scientists join us now to consider what Labour's thinking might be, or what it should be. Richard Johnson is a politics lecturer at Lancaster University, written about the Labour Party in the EU. He's in Lancaster. And here with me in the studios, Chris Curtis from YouGov. Good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon.
Richard Johnson, can you talk us through the way that you think that Labour should be approaching this?
I think the first thing to look at is the electoral geography of the referendum and how that translated into the different constituencies. So although the country was basically half and half Leave or Remain, about 2/3 of constituencies are estimated to have voted Leave and about 1/3 are estimated to have voted Remain. And so that means that if we had an election that was fought on Brexit, a Remain alliance, even if 100% of Remain voters voted for it, would only get about 1/3 of the seats in Parliament, whereas a Leave alliance, if it locked down all of the Leave vote, could win a majority very easily. So you can construct a majority in Parliament very easily without Remain support at all. But you can't construct a majority in Parliament without some Leave support, and that's Labour's challenge.
OK, so they should hold out against those saying, yes, have a referendum, but campaign to Remain. Chris Curtis, do you agree with that?
Not particularly, no. I think the hypothetical example he used there of a United Remain winning all the votes and a United Leave winning all the Leave votes in a constituency actually isn't how this is playing out in practice at the moment. And actually what is more than important isn't so much whether a constituency falls one or the other side of that 50-50 line. But for the parties, when we're talking about electoral strategy, it is about the coalition of voters that you can build inside each constituency. And when we look at the polling data we're getting back at the moment, the biggest threat to the Labour Party are the voters that they're losing, the Remain voters that they're losing to the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. And they won't just be losing those in Remain seats, they'll be losing those in Leave seats as well. And if that happens, then they stand no chance in an election. They need to start winning back those Remain voters.
And is this the argument that there are some people who would vote for Leave who will not be voting for other parties, so Labour doesn't need to worry about that?
Well, it's more the fact that most Labour voters, the vast majority of Labour voters, are Remainers. I mean, even in Leave's constituencies, even in those areas, the people who are voting for Labour in those constituencies, the people that would consider voting for Labour in those constituencies, they're the vast majority of them are Remainers, and they're the people that Labour has to predominantly care about.
OK, so if you had the Labour Party's ear, would you be saying it's entirely logical, therefore, that you should be, yes, have your referendum, whichever side of an election, but campaign for Remain? That would do them well politically.
Well, it has done. Since they've taken a slightly more Remain position, they've gone up slightly in the polls over the previous months. You know, our most recent polling, they're in the low 20s. That's not great, but it is better than some of the dire numbers we were seeing, particularly in the run-up to that European Parliament referendum, where they came in third place behind the Liberal Democrats. So yes, they needed to take a harder stance on Brexit, and they are starting to win back over some Remain voters because they're doing so.
Richard Johnson, how do you answer that, the evidence that it's a more Remain position is working?
I think we have to be very careful at looking just at the national polling. We have to understand how this is playing out in the constituencies. Yes, 1 in 3 Labour voters voted Leave, 2 in 3 voted Remain. But that doesn't mean that that's the case in every constituency. It would strain credulity to say that 1 in 3 Labour voters in Cambridge voted Leave, for example. Similarly, it strains credulity to say 2 in 3 Labour voters in Blackpool North voted Remain. And so I think what Labour needs, if we take a seat like Southampton Itchen, for example, in 2017 the Labour vote went up 10 percentage points, but the Green and Lib Dem vote only went down 3 percentage points. So where was the rest of Labour's gain? Well, it came from the decline of UKIP, which went down 11 percentage points. Some of that UKIP vote went to the Tories, but actually a substantial minority went to Labour. And it's that substantial minority of Labour voters who are being put off and will cost Labour very dearly in the Midlands, the North and in Wales.
So just on that point, though, I mean, we talk about these marginal seats and the kind of seats that Labour needs to gain to get a majority. Actually, when you take them as a whole, all of these seats, you add them up, actually you find, if anything, they are slightly more Remain than the country as a whole. Why? Because actually some of the most marginal seats that Labour needs to be gaining, they're over more than you would expect are in Scotland, which obviously voted to Remain, and actually even the ones that are in England and Wales basically look like the rest of the country as a whole. Yes, some of them are more Leave, others are slightly more Remain as well. There's still constituencies in the south. There's still some in London that they'd be hoping to pick up.
How do you work these things out? I'm just considering the complexity of the fractured nature of our politics. Richard Johnson, I mean, how much of this? I wouldn't want to accuse you just of following your gut, but how's the modelling work?
Well, I mean, I think it's really about some of the assumptions that are built into the strategy. So, Chris just mentioned that a lot of the seats Labour needs to gain are in Scotland, but those gaining seats off the SNP don't reduce the likelihood of a Tory majority. They just shift the seats within the Remain alliance. 80% of the most marginal Conservative seats that Labour needs to win to put the Tories out of power were Leave voting seats. 1 in 4 Remainers in a YouGov poll say they respect the referendum result, whereas only 1 in 20 Leavers want a second referendum. So I just think that there's a lot of wishful thinking from some people, and I think they're going to become unstuck at the next election.
Well, whenever it comes, it's going to be fascinating. Richard Johnson and Chris Curtis, thank you both very much, and good luck with